Awesome, Christine. Welcome to the Future of Fashion Business podcast. Great to have you here.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
No, likewise, I'm very, very, very excited. It's been a while since the last time that I spoke with somebody with, more of a sustainability focus part
Mhm.
of the industry. And it is something that I think has evolved a lot in the last couple of years, definitely since the last time I've had the conversation. So I'm also very, very excited on the topics that we're going to talk about.
Oh yeah, for sure. Happy to go into that. I've been doing this for like 15 years. So the last 5 years has been very different from the previous 10 before that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, now that you said that, that pretty much makes me want to dive straight into the episode and ask you. I mean, how did you get started? Because 15 years. I mean, this is a sort of like career path that I guess a lot of people are considering now that it has gotten the attention that it has gotten the last couple of years. But I mean, 15 years ago, I mean, probably it wasn't even like a formal job. It was just like something that you enjoyed doing, and somebody gave you the opportunity and gave you a title for that. So, like, how did you sort of end up in this part of the industry specifically?
Yeah. It was very different. So you're right about that. Like, I look now and I see you can have special, you can major in this in school. You can have your master's program focused on sustainability, and not just sustainability, but on life cycle assessment or really specific things. And when I started, that was definitely not the case. So I got into this. I started my career as a corporate lawyer, and this was back in 2002. And I practiced law for 3 years. I was doing venture capital and private equity law. Didn't like it. So then I went and got my MBA at INSEAD in France and Singapore. And it was when I was graduating that I started the career in sustainable fashion. And that was with a small startup called Eden Apparel, which was founded by Ali Hewson and Bono from U2. And the purpose of this company was to create sustainable employment opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa. And within Eden, which was a small startup, it was about 20 people, doing high-end men's and women's contemporary fashion. And they wanted to start a B2B business, which is very similar to actually what I'm doing at Pangaea, which we'll get into, I'm sure. And this B2B business was going to be focused on providing blank t-shirts, sweatshirts that were 100% made in Africa to try to keep the value add within the continent of Africa, so that the capacity building and skill upskilling and everything would stay in the continent. So that was my first job in sustainability and in sustainable fashion. So this was back in 2006. So definitely at Eden was a really pioneering. And yeah, at this, my title was business development manager. It was really like building out the brand, but there was such a strong impact. I mean, the mission was impact. So that's kind of where things started out. And most companies did not have like their CSR departments or sustainability departments. It was just something that was getting started. So definitely really different from what we see today, thankfully.
Right. Yeah. So it was more of a matter of the brand and the founders looking at this as a future before it actually, like, people were actually thinking about it and understanding the necessity of somebody to focus on that, have that sort of focus in their business strategy. And it just happened to be you. And it was just something that, again, because it was a requirement the company saw beforehand, that you sort of fell into, right?
Yeah. So when I was at business school, I realized, but before I entered business school, I kind of thought you either had to be in a for-profit company or a nonprofit organization, and that there was nothing in the middle. And it didn't really, there wasn't that much in the middle. And this was, again, back in 2006. It was the year that Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for microfinance. And so this idea of microfinance, that, you can kind of combine an impact purpose with market-driven strategies, and
Sure.
this combination that you can be in the middle and you don't have to be just one or the other. Because when I was thinking about my career, like, I did not want to be in a big huge company where my job was very defined and I felt like a cog in the wheel, but I also didn't want to be in like an NGO where I might only have impact on a small amount of people, or again be in a gigantic NGO where I'd be like a cog, just focused on my tiny perimeter. um,
Yeah, or
So
just
this really,
limited by, lack of resources, a lot of
yeah,
the limitations on impact that come with just working for a nonprofit.
yeah. So this idea of using the market to drive impact is something that I'm actually really passionate about, and trying to understand what are the incentives that we need to put in place that will drive everybody to make the right decisions. So, after Eden, I worked at INSEAD, which is where I did my MBA, and the Entrepreneurship Center there. And I was looking at double, triple bottom line companies and how you manage the trade off between the financial return you want to achieve and the impact.
Right.
And so that's really been a driving force behind my career, is like how do you merge these two? How do people respond to be able to make sure that they're not mutually exclusive, the finance and the impact,
Mhm.
the revenue and the impact drivers.
Right. Yeah, because as you say, it is extremely important for it to be incentivized. If it isn't incentivized, then it's going to
Mhm,
be very difficult to have substantial progress in that area. And the biggest
uh-huh,
incentives for a corporation, it is, how financially viable or productive is it for you to focus on that area of the business development. So I definitely understand. And I'm
mhm,
guessing, and correct me if I'm right, but if I'm wrong, but the sort of process probably when something like this, right? Like you had, the innovators, maybe smaller brands that were had less of a corporate structure, that were looking, maybe felt passionate about these specific areas because they saw the impact that, being sustainable or being conscious in terms of your supply chain, what you were doing, was something that they didn't necessarily do with because of the money or the financial incentives. It was just like a sort of like a personal responsibility.
mhm,
It just so happens that it eventually developed into something that was way more than just something that was personally rewarding, but also that could be also financially viable for a business once the market accepted it, and once that the market grew in awareness and level of education. And once you got those two factors, the
mhm,
obviously the fulfillment, both personal and from a corporation perspective, of
mhm.
being conscious in this area of the business model, and also the fact that it was also financially viable, and not only viable, but like it was a major financial incentive. Now that's why everybody's sort of like getting on this train of focusing on this area of development for each and every company, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think we have like a lot of tools in our toolbox now for making this case for sustainability. So, again, I've been doing this since 2006. And I got to say, sometimes I'm sitting around going, oh my gosh, this is the exact same conversation. When people are saying things like, let's tell the story behind our product. Like we've been saying that for 15 years. Now we have, or probably longer, but now we have the technology that allows you to tell that story. We have within Pangaya, for example, we're using digital passports by this innovator called Eon, where a consumer can use a QR code and really look back and see the journey of the product from the sourcing of the raw material. This, we didn't really have the same technology that long ago, but everybody was talking about we need to tell the story of the product. I think another thing is everyone used to say like, oh, we need to make sustainability sexy or desirable. And that's been the same conversation. And now again, with the new innovations, material science innovations we're seeing, or new techniques that fabric or dye mills have, like we're able to kind of get within Pangaya. An example of this would be like the nettle. We're using nettle
Mm-hmm.
historically, or hemp, and historically it's been like, oh, you're going to wear nettle or hemp, you're going to feel like you're wearing a potato sack, it's going to be scratchy and terrible, and no one wants to have that, it's not desirable. But now we're able to actually make the nettle and the hemp feel amazing, and we have nettle in our jeans, we have nettle in our jersey, and it feels as good as the nicest cotton. So nowadays we have more possibility to fulfill the sustainability mission in
Mm-hmm.
a way that resonates with consumers, which is incredibly important. And we also have a number of other drivers. So a number of reasons like why we have these tools to make the case. And regulation is one. There's so much new
Mm-hmm.
regulation coming down the
So,
pike.
so there has been progress from a politics perspective as well.
Totally. I mean, now there are more producer responsibility regulations, so that whoever is selling a product is responsible for the end of life of that product. I live in Paris, so there's a French law that you cannot destroy excess inventory.
Hmm.
And all of this is going back to the incentives. It's going to drive companies to behave differently. So I think that's quite important. And another thing that's huge is that there's a lot of data now that shows that companies that are acting more sustainably are actually more profitable.
Hmm.
And if you look at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, the companies who are on this index are outperforming companies that are not. So you also have this business case on the revenue side to say, look, this is actually going to help our business. You need a long-term perspective, which might be
Hmm.
different. But we have many reasons now to say this is actually the right way of doing business, and we have a lot of proof points that we can point to and a lot of data.
Hmm.
So I think that makes it much easier
Yeah, the argument's
now
a
to
little,
start
yeah, of
implementing. Yeah,
course. Yeah, the arguments become a little bit, well, a lot easier to sort of resolve. Because that's
exactly.
what I find very, very interesting for you to being, in this part of the industry for so long. I mean, you've seen it evolve in every single aspect of it. Not only evolve from a technological perspective, as you said, politically, but also just how the discourse and the conversations has changed over time and who's having those conversations, right? Because again,
Mhm.
at the very beginning, it was, the innovators, the entrepreneurs that saw this as a possibility, maybe as a personal duty to do so, but they were limited by lack of technology,
Mhm.
lack of financial support because people didn't really believe it, political challenges, and the conversation has switched completely into something that again is being incentivized in every single area of it. Again, financially,
Mhm.
because again there's starting to be proof of it being a, a solid financial strategy for a business. Politically, because again, politicians, either if you want to argue because people are more aware of it, or politicians themselves are more aware of it, are pushing policies forward to support this. And it's just something that has gotten a lot of momentum in a good way. But
Yeah.
I find it very interesting, and I want to connect this to my next question. What
Mhm.
has been, in your personal sort of awareness of this entire thing, the biggest and most important factor that determined the progress of this area of you know
So
what
what's driven this conversation around sustainability to the
forward,
forefront?
yeah, to the forefront,
Yeah.
and what has had the biggest effect on this, yeah, going forward.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think it's been covered in the news much more than it was before, and it's been really focused on sort of the conversation around climate.
Hmm.
And I think people are seeing actually the effects of climate change in their day-to-day lives. So that's been, one person told me a long time ago that if you want to get someone to pay attention to something, you have to really bring it close to them and why it's important to them as an individual. And they compared it to like a dropping a pebble into a pond, and you can see that ripple effect floating out. And the conversation around carbon 10 or 15 years ago was sort of one of those outer ripples, because people, it was too abstract and people didn't really understand like carbon emissions. What does that mean?
Hmm.
And things around like food would be much easier for people to understand. It's going in their body, or um, much more of a priority for them to pay attention to, because it's going in their body, and then you have your clothes. But I think with carbon, something that started as really abstract 10 or 15 years ago has gotten very real for people, because they're seeing the effects of climate change in their day-to-day lives. They're seeing it through the extreme weather events that they're experiencing, and they're seeing it on the news. They're seeing strange storms, or the sea level rising coverage and all of this. And so then it becomes really important to the consumer, and rightly or wrongly, the focus on the consumer is so important for all business, because they're buying the product.
Hmm.
So once the consumer starts making those connections and starts demanding this type of product or service, then the businesses respond much more quickly.
Hmm.
But I think if you look at the BBC, they published the documentaries with Sir David Attenborough, which were incredibly powerful, like Blue Planet. And people would see that. I think, we do have a lot of amazing storytelling happening
Mhm.
So in addition to like news, regular news coverage, the storytelling and the documentaries and everything that we're seeing, like Kiss the Ground, the documentary about regenerative agriculture,
Yep.
people see that and it really changes how they're looking at the way they're living their lives or consuming.
Mhm.
So I think this
Yep.
imagery, these visuals, this coverage has really, and the live experiences that people are having has made it much more of a reality and something that people have to pay attention to now.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's fun because it was almost like a natural result of, again, just the marketplace people in general becoming more educated. And it was
mhm.
funny that, educating a person is, I mean, educating one person is extremely difficult on a specific topic. Can you imagine, educating an entire country or, entire
Yeah.
planet on something like this? So it's very interesting now that you mentioned it. Yeah, just how big of a role content that almost seems has a lot of entertainment value in its nature has been
Mhm.
responsible for educating a lot of people on this particular topic. And again,
Mhm.
people need to, I think people forget that the business's responsibility is to respond to the demands and the needs of the marketplace, you know
Mhm.
and if the marketplace changes philosophy, again, increases levels of education, the business won't have any alternative but to adapt to that
Yeah.
eventually. you know
Yeah.
I think that it's been a process that's been, and here's when I because I'm not very, obviously I'm not very savvy
Mhm.
on this topic at all, but
No, you can tell you put a lot of thought into it, so it's great.
I appreciate it. But I mean, people have been, or at least you hear this in the media a lot about people complaining about,
Mhm.
how slow this entire change has been happening.
Mhm.
But I mean, it is something that's been in the works for decades, right? I mean,
Oh
the
yeah.
the change seems superficially like it happened in a couple of years, but I mean, that was just sort of like the pivotal event, right, for this entire
Exactly.
movement. It's been in the works for years and years and years, with
It
people like
has.
yourself and others just trying to push it forward.
It was the tipping point. Like we reached sort of the tipping point in the last 3 to 5 years, and everyone's going, "Oh my gosh!" Because even during like public speaking engagements, I'd say 5 years ago, I'd ask the audience, "What are some of the things you think of when you hear sustainability? What words would you use to describe if a product is more sustainable?" And 5 years ago or 6 years ago, when I do this, people would be, it's not as good, it's more expensive, it's a big constraint, it's an obligation, it's compliance. Everything was very negative. And now, when I ask the same questions, it's really changed, and people see sustainability as providing more opportunity, as uh, the right way to do things, as the future. It's really interesting to see how in sort of this public zeitgeist it's completely turned around.
Yeah, it's become almost aspirational.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, that's the right way to
Awesome.
put it.
Awesome. And how, going to this question, because it is a definition that is going to change and is going to evolve and develop a lot, especially
Mhm.
has been in the last couple of years. What would you define as sustainability
Mhm.
now?
Yeah, I think sort of the traditional definition is that you leave the world in no worse of a place for your future generations. So you don't want to deliver a damaged world to your children. And so I think that's still what I would stick to when I hear sustainability. It's a very overused term now. Everyone's kind
Exactly.
of throwing everything into the bucket. Um, and now I think something that's really exciting that a lot of companies are focused on is not just we want to keep the status quo and not have too much of a negative impact, but looking at how to have a positive impact. And with Pangaya, our vision is to be earth positive. And, we're focused on material science innovations. And the way we looked at that is saying, well, look at regenerative agriculture systems, look at carbon capture technologies. We use
Hmm.
one called Air Ink that takes carbon emissions and turns it into a black ink that you can use to screen print. So I think looking at this future of possibilities around and where you could actually leave the world potentially in a better place for future generations, that's quite an exciting concept.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to ask you that question, because, you know,
Mhm.
as topics, words are overused, they start losing or at least abstracting its
Yeah.
meaning once again. And it did happen
Mhm.
with this, you know, what's this sustainability word. I guess what's fascinating about thinking about it that way is that, again, it's more than a specific definition. It just almost describes like this philosophy to create something for the better.
Mhm.
It could be from an ecological perspective. It could be from a political perspective, from a personal perspective, and maybe even
Yeah.
corporate culture. You know,
Mhm.
so I think one of the best things about looking at it that way is that you're able to grasp something that might be an abstract topic and see how you can apply it and focus on something real
Yeah.
and in a specific
Yeah.
business, right? Because I think
Mhm.
a lot of people, and this is very relevant to people starting out, you know, businesses with the scale that Pangaya has, their biggest businesses like the
Mhm.
Kering Group, which is also a place where you've had some experiences.
Mhm.
They're able to grasp very abstract concepts and sort of be okay, like we're going to work on the ecological part, we're going to work on the political part, because they have a lot of, you know, they have thousands of people working for them, they have big resources, they can move the ship into that direction. But somebody that's starting out, you know, might be very, very overwhelmed because of the again, you say sustainability, it's like, okay, but what does sustainability mean? Does it mean that I should have like products that are ecologically friendly? Does it mean that I should have like a specific corporate culture that promotes I don't know, uh working with people in good working conditions? What does that word mean? And by sort of being okay, so it, as long as you understand the fundamental principle of what it means, you can sort of adapt to it to whatever seems natural to you and your personal philosophy. You know, as a business,
Mhm.
you can take responsibility and focus in one area of the business. You know what, we're going to focus all of our resources on maybe the ecological part of sustainability, or we're going to use our financial resources to push and innovate the corporate culture, or the you know, the working conditions on third world countries part of it. It opens a new world of ambitions and possibilities to the everyday entrepreneur on what area of that specific part of the industry they want to focus on and they want to innovate and develop on, right?
Yeah, I love how you put that, because this is really, really an important point. Is good, and you do have to prioritize within the world of sustainability. Like, what is the thing that you're most passionate about as a designer or an entrepreneur, in terms of the brand? Is it carbon? Is it the social side, and working with people in the supply chain? Is it the
Fabric
material?
innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to focus. I do talk to brands, and they'll say, oh, we want to use your material, but then if we ship it, then it's not sustainable. And it's like, you can't do everything.
Yeah.
There are pros and cons, and there are trade-offs, and you just have to say, what is my North Star? Where am I going to try to be as perfect as possible? And where do I need to make some compromises to get to this North Star? Because if we all stop and say we need to be perfect everywhere now,
Not
we're
feasible.
going to get paralyzed. It's
Mhm.
it's too much.
Yeah, of course, it's not feasible, especially for, you know, the brands that are really dictating the future of industries. Because I strongly believe, I mean, big groups are really good at responding very well, and maybe long term making it better because of the leverage that they have. But I don't want to say small brands, because Pangaya definitely isn't small, but it is a brand that has a lot more flexibility in terms of what they can do and achieve, and they can do it at a faster pace. And it is brands like that who have to come up with those decisions, right? Of, okay, what's my part? Like, what's my part to play? I'm not going to disrupt the entire industry, because if I try doing that, my entire brand's going to go down. It's not going to be feasible, and I'm going to have I'm going to have zero impact. I think people should really think about it as, how can we approach this as a collective, and what is the one thing that you are going to commit to be responsible for and collaborating in? Because
Yeah.
it is that way, and that is the only real way to have solid progress and such a complex and vast uh, I would say
Hmm.
just problem in this part
Yeah.
of the industry.
Yeah. Because humanity is complex, and you can't just break it down to one thing and say, and you can't oversimplify it.
Right.
But I do, yeah, I think your point about big versus small companies is really interesting as well, because with Pangaya, obviously it is much more agile, and the focus of Pangaya is material science innovations. And so it's really saying we can move quickly. We have allocated resources internally for material science innovations. So we have like an R&D team of 15 people. They're ex-Adidas, ex-Lululemon, ex-Burberry. So incredible expertise across different segments, understand the performance levels needed. They can identify and work with the best innovators for the best technologies. We have a lot of resources that have gone into impact as well. So with our impact team and doing life cycle assessments across over 90%, I believe, of our materials. And then we have supply chain partnerships. So we can get very close to these really, I mean, the suppliers are key in making any of this a reality. And so by working with them so closely, we can iterate, we can improve, and we can get things out very quickly. And even if Pangaya is smaller, it can be that proof point on the market saying, look, we launched it, we did it. And it de-risks things for everybody. And,
Right.
you know, it makes it easier for others who want to launch the same thing and have been maybe too afraid. And it shows what that it's possible and that it's resonating. Not that, I mean, there are so many big brands doing incredible work and getting innovations out there too. So Pangaya is doing its part in this bigger picture, because, you know, we are still a growing company on this journey like everybody else is. So there's no feeling of like, I think we're really looking at the collaborative aspect of this and how can we play our part in working with these innovators to try to be that agile speedboat as opposed to the bigger cruise ship or Titanic sort of ship, which some of the bigger companies might be in trying to get innovation in particular out faster.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting how that works. And I think, again, to just make it a little bit easier for people to understand, it really is about focusing on what's the part that you're going to play and being very, very specific on that, because that's the best thing that you can do eventually or long term for if you want to push or solve a problem like this long term, because it is, and the industry's work is a collective. I mean, that's the nature of competition, right? It's how do we continuously do our part, improve on it, and based on that, move forward. And that's how the entire process works. I mean, whenever you play your part, you open opportunities for other people to play their part better. And it's just a cycle of feedback that eventually will open it and creates solid movement long term. You know, it's not like this. I mean, and that's what's particularly difficult about industries like the fashion industry, because you could probably do this with technology, right? Because there's a lot of scale, like there's a lot more simplicity in when it comes to growth and a lot of different things like that. But because the fashion industry is so complex, it cannot have the same approach. Like it has to be collaborative.
Yeah, it does. And sustainability in general has been a place where there's more of a desire to collaborate. You know, you can call it like cooperation or something, because there's a tension for sure between we want to collaborate. We know the impact is important, but brands also saying, but we still want to be first to market. We still see this as a competitive advantage. So, and then of course you have to be sort of in a pre-competitive space in order to do really good collaboration with other brands. So, but no, I mean, I think there are a lot of examples today of how this is happening. There's Textile Exchange, which Pangaya is a member of, is a great organization getting brands together around these important topics. Fashion for Good, specifically around innovation, is an accelerator, has a number of big brands like Kering, PVH, Target, you know, all working toward the same objectives together and providing that space where we can find collaboration to try to move the needle on impact.
Yeah. And it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of the conversation. Like the best thing about it, that it's now a thing about, like, it is productive from a business perspective to have this philosophy as well. Because as you said, like the opportunity to improve now becomes the opportunity to have a competitive advantage, which will reflect itself as a business opportunity, as a solid business strategy, and I don't know much about Pangaya, but superficially and based on the research that I've done, it is like this part, the sustainability part, the innovation behind the fabrics is probably one of the biggest factors of what makes Pangaya something different from, or did something different from its competitors. because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is important to also think about it that way.
Yeah. But we're trying to open up as much as possible all of the learnings that we have. And so that's, I'm on the B2B side of the business at Pangaya. So in addition to our direct to consumer brand, which I'm sure many listeners know and see the text block on the chest, which transparently says like what is in the product. The B2B side is trying to be this collaborative arm where we say we want to be the innovation concierge and provide this turnkey solution saying, these are all the technologies that we think are the best that are out there that we've been able to identify. We've worked with our R&D team to get them to the right performance levels with our suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
We've done all the required testing. We've done the life cycle assessments on the impact side. And now we can work with you brands, other brands, and let you access what we have and work with you to improve it or do custom research with you on development with you on certain pain points that you're having. So it's really, trying to, we say open source as much as
it is
possible.
open source. Yeah, it is open source, and that's the benefit of it, and that's what's magical about competition, because I think people look at competition as something that is cutthroat, but it is, for me, it's just it's the fuel for innovation, and when you are able to have both innovation and an open source philosophy, that's where things really start moving quickly in a positive direction. Now, another question I want to ask you, I know you're more focused on the B2B aspect of sustainability, I guess. But I mean, a 15-year-long career, you have probably been very in touch with also the direct to consumer aspect of it all. So what would you say the biggest differences, and let me think of a more specific way to ask this question. What would be the biggest difference from a business perspective and understanding how to handle direct, like, business to consumer sustainability strategies and business to business sustainability strategies? Because I'm guessing it works completely different.
Yeah, there are definitely differences. So, I think when you're talking to the consumer, going back a bit to what we were saying on how can you make it relevant for them and their lives? How can you make it desirable, accessible? I think our content team at Pangaya is incredible, and comms team at being able to communicate these really complex technologies and the reason why they're important in a way that's fun for the consumer, that's getting their attention, that doesn't seem pedagogic or boring. So, you want to keep this
the emotional aspect,
the community building part, and the fun of it. You want to keep sustainability can get you really depressed. You start going, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? We only have 10 years left. Everything's going to go over the 1.5 degrees. It's over, and I think you have to keep it interesting and fun and to engage people as much as you can. I mean, we know it's a serious topic, but we also want to keep people excited.
You have a brand to protect. Yeah.
And there is opportunity, and we can do this, but we can only do it if we're all working on it together, and if we're all understanding why and what our role is. You're really good at saying we all have our part to play. Like, what is the part we can play? So I think on the consumer conversation, those are really important aspects. And then when we're talking with the brands, the brands are the ones that have to create the product or the service and have to get it out there. So they're really concerned with the risk. Is this product going to be as good? Is it going to meet our performance criteria? Are people going to accept it if it's new? So for them, it's how do you de-risk things for them? How do you show them that the work has been done, that all the testing has been done, or that, with Pangaya, the direct to consumer brand, as I mentioned, can be this proof point saying, look, we did it. It went well. Consumers liked it. So then they can kind of go, oh, okay, all right, that's going to be all right. And then I think there's also this credibility aspect, because if you're working with a company on a B2B level, they need to be a reliable supplier for you. And you need to be able to establish relationships where they're going to be responsive, where they're going to deliver. And so I think that's something that's really important for Pangaya on the B2B side, is to convey that we can do this, that we have the supply chain partnerships in place, which we do. We have RDD Textiles in Portugal that we're working with very closely. They're a fabric mill and dye house. We also have Grado Zero in Italy, which has invented and developed our flower down technology, for example, which is our insulation that is made from wildflowers. So it's animal free and petroleum free, 100% natural. So really incredible minds constantly looking at how we're going to make new materials to solve some of the pain points we're seeing. And then we have other great partners on the industrialization side as well. Like Imbotex is a partner of ours in Italy. And with the flower down, we're doing a non-woven padding with them. So for quilted jackets, stuff like that. And when you say to another brand, well, hey, we're working with Imbotex or RDD on this, they go, oh, amazing. Okay. Because I know that from my experience at Kering, where I was focused on sustainable innovation, you'd find a technology, you would love to use it. But then you're really concerned, okay, like these are two guys, maybe one's a scientist and the other one just got out of business school and they have an amazing technology, but can you really offer this up to a gigantic brand saying, look what we found? You know, you need, and sometimes you can. I don't want to say, I mean, obviously sometimes you can, but it goes to this idea of the credibility and getting the brands to say, okay, we know that this supplier will be reliable. We know we can go to them. So this is what needs to be conveyed to the B2B customer, right. Which we're trying to develop those relationships, you know, within the Pangaea B2B arm.
Of course. Wow. So many cool things to talk about. So little time. Let me see. So yeah, just to summarize everything from a B2C perspective, it's more about communicating efficiently. From a business to business perspective, it's more about having internal trust between, you know, people, suppliers, partners, and financial risk aversion.
Yeah, not just financial risk, but I would say reputational risk.
Branding,
as well.
branding risk more than anything.
Both. Yeah. Okay. And I think also on the sustainability side, there's a huge risk now for everybody around greenwashing because it has become so important. And that's also why the impact data, having that to be able to communicate, to have internally, but also to be able to communicate if you want to, is really important on the reputational risk side as well.
Okay. Wow. Very interesting. And one question that I do want to ask you, and I hope we get the chance to cover it before we have to wrap up the episode, is I'm very interested in the transition that you had from, you know, a group like Kering into something sort of like the role that you're doing now. And you might be doing similar roles, maybe not, but I mean, the environment has been completely different, I'm guessing. So, from a sustainability perspective and the thing that you try to focus on your work, what has been the biggest shift and the biggest difference from going, you know, work in an environment like Kering with maybe a lot more resources, but a lot more complexity from a corporate structure perspective to something like Pangaea?
Yeah, definitely different. Definitely, as you pointed out. And people have commented on this a few times, like, wow, it must be so different. And it is, but there are more similarities than you would imagine as well. So my role at Kering was in the headquarters at group level to work with the brands, because there are a number of, you know, brands within the group level houses. Yep. And understand what is it that they're looking for primarily, what are their priorities, what are they most focused on, and then work to be able to identify across the entire value chain, from raw materials to end of life, business models, you know, the whole thing, digital, to identify what is out there, which would be the best ones to match with the pain points we're seeing internally, and then kind of move them through the funnel so that they're working with more operational arms within, at this point, the Kering group. So the Material Innovation Lab or others that could test. So
so the how to make it happen pretty much is identifying what needs improvement and how do we make it happen.
Right. So that whole process, I think, is similar no matter where you are. You want to identify the best technologies. You want to be able to test them. I guess the difference that you find with Pangaea in particular is this laser focus on material science innovation, so that there's so much resource put into this part of the business. And most companies, most brands do not have a 15-person innovation team looking across very specifically like This is the person looking at dye solutions. This is a person working on trim solutions. This is a person, like just really specialized in being able to focus on what is the best technology in this specific domain. So that's something that's different
Yeah.
and wonderful. I mean, there are some brands that do have incredibly strong R&D teams, but by and large, it's rare within apparel.
Of course.
So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
the same thing. It's a big boat is a lot more difficult for it to be agile.
Yep.
And that
Hmm.
that is very, very
Hmm.
blatant and clear when you put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that, but it's also about the fact that the focus of it. If I think if you're in a big group, there are many things you have to be concerned with.
Of course.
And if it's a public group, for example, you have more exposure potentially from a liability point of view. So you can't necessarily drive so
The
much
complexity,
into.
because there's
Mhm.
20 brands with different branding identities and philosophies and
Yeah.
priorities. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I love this focus part. I love also that there the connection with the supply chain. So I think historically, and this is changing, I believe, overall, because brands are seeing that if we want to make the sustainability targets a reality, we have to be closer to our suppliers, because for the last 50 years it's been very arm's length, it's been very transactional, very top down, like the brand is giving the supplier orders, and you need to develop those partnerships, and it's a long-term relationship. And now this is everybody's kind of realizing that we need to embrace these relationships more, which I think is great.
Okay, awesome. And one last question. When it
Mhm.
comes to, I mean, because when you're dealing with, again, complexity like that, again, it's the most important part is to simplify it, and is what needs to be innovated, what needs to be solved, what needs to be improved, identifying that, and then just trying to understand the how do we improve it or how do we solve it, right?
Mhm.
When you're in a company like Pangaya, obviously that process is a lot simpler, because it's okay. This is who we
Yeah.
are, very clear. This is the brand. This is what
Mhm.
we have to do. This is the problem.
Mhm.
What can we do to fix it? And is it a problem that falls into our area of specialty and the things that we do, or is it not? But when you're dealing with again an entire group, identifying and prioritizing must probably be also a lot more difficult. So
Mhm.
how do you make those decisions? Like what?
Mhm. I am so glad you're asking this question.
Mhm.
This is a great question, because you have to look at the impact data. You have to look at data. And when you're working like in my domain, or when you're looking at sustainability, and the fashion industry has been very bad at collecting this data so far. Many industries have. It's getting better. The technology, as we mentioned, is enabling this so that we can collect more that we haven't been able to do in the last 10 years ago. The visibility on the supply chain we can get all of that. But you ideally, if you want to achieve the most impact, you have to look at the data and say, okay, well then what do I need to focus on to achieve the most impact? And so that's why things like the life cycle assessments are important to look at. There are a lot of different, resources available to help young starting brands sort of look to this and understand. You still need to prioritize and say, my focus will be really this. But even within carbon, for example, there are many ways you can break that down and say, okay, this should be my real, if I'm going to look at carbon, this should be my real focus, even within that, because the impact data shows that this is where I can have the most return on investment for impact. Like
Okay.
that's what you need to look at.
Right. So it's more about what's the return on investment on impact more than what's the return on investment financially short term necessarily for the next quarter,
Ideally, if
or
you want to
like
have
a
a
mix, right?
double or triple bottom line approach, then yeah, you're going to have to take that into account. The way that you can look at, are you a financially driven company or a mission driven company, is really to say, where are you maximizing, where are you optimizing? If you're trying to maximize profit and optimize on impact, then that's going to be your first port of call, is how do I
Mm,
maximize my revenue or my profit in this case. If you want to be impact driven, then you're saying, where am I going to have the most impact? And then of course you still need a sustainable business model, or you're not going to be in business at all and you won't achieve that impact anyway. But
mhm.
you have to kind of it really depends on what your goal is as a business, which
Of
side
course.
you fall on, and you have to clearly define that, or it's going to be quite muddled.
Yeah, and it goes back to the, I mean, the common denominator of the conversation of understand what part you're playing and
Mm-hmm.
focusing on that, because
Mm-hmm.
it's going to reflect from, again, the complexity of the business model to the complexity of making decisions.
Yeah.
Because it is about, yeah, you need to understand data, but what data do you focus on? Well, that's relative to who you are as a business. What are
Yeah.
your goals? What are you
Mm-hmm.
trying to achieve? And
Mm-hmm.
again, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not specific on that, it's going to be impossible to sort of move forward on it on that end.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow, very
Exactly.
interesting. Awesome. And one very last question, short question
Mhm.
before we wrap this episode up, would be if you could give a young entrepreneur or young person trying to develop themselves in this part of the industry a specific advice, what be the biggest piece of advice that you'd give him, her, or yourself if that was the case, and
Mhm.
why?
I I always believe that you should not limit yourself at all. You should go after whatever you are the most passionate about, that you believe in the most, and go 150% after that. I think that's really, you need to be lit up by what you're doing to be successful. So that would be the thing that I would say is the most important. Don't say, oh, but I've never done it before. Oh, but I didn't do. I don't have the right skill level right now. If you don't work on it, do it. Get there and just be focused on, like, what is it that resonates with you the most, where you're the most passionate, and don't limit yourself in how you're going to get there. Just work hard, develop your network. That's incredibly important, as always. And get there and work on it, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it, because if you have a bunch of people telling you you can't do it, then you're onto something really good, I think.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, it's special if it comes from a very true place for yourself.
Yeah, because sometimes if you don't have the experience, you'll come in with fresh eyes and you'll do it completely differently and revolutionize something that others can't see because they've
Mhm.
been too locked in the system. So,
Yeah,
yeah, would be my
awesome.
message. Hmm.
Wow, what an incredible conversation, Christine. Again, I wish we had well, with these topics, I can always talk for hours. So I always
Yeah.
complain about time anyway. But I really appreciate you coming on. I
Thank
think
you.
really valuable conversation, and hope to have you back on again sometime in the future.
Thanks, Esteban. I really appreciate your invitation, and I hope that other people get inspired by some of the discussion we had and want to go out and start their own companies and really make a change.